Welcome everyone to the live stream of Live Footy. Santi, we're here for another Fallout, not the exciting Fallout that we want to. I started to get a little cheeky with our titling here.
Hmm.
Defensively sound, yada yada yada. I
Mm.
mean, this is another game where we have another scoreless match. I think it's 4 out of 6 matches have been scoreless, and it's good that you're defensively sound, but we're going to talk a lot about how you have to translate that into goals at some point. So I don't know. This is another frustrating one for me.
Yeah. And 4 games without goals obviously is an issue. And yeah, two were scoreless ties, but now you are in a game, 2 games losing a streak, and going to Kansas City against a team that also needs a result.
Huh.
But yeah, it's early in the season, still time to figure things out, fix things. But now the team is starting to pile some injuries, and I know we're gonna talk a little bit about that
Oof.
later. But we'll see what happens in the next few weeks.
You ready to kick this one off with the pod recording?
Let's do it.
Welcome in everyone to Flyover Footy. My name is Matt Baker, joined as always by my friend in soccer, Santiago Beltran, for another Fallout look. Post-match, this one is a St. Louis City 1-0 loss to Austin FC at home at Energizer Park. City lost. City 2 ended up winning in PK shootouts in the doubleheader. We're here to talk about the City match. And Santi, you were on the call. How are you doing this day after we're recording, and initial thoughts on the match?
Doing great, Matt. Obviously, a little disappointed about the loss, about the lack of offense for a lot of the game. Defense is still looking great, but if you get a score on and you're not able to score to revert the result, obviously, you're going to have a few of these 1-0 loses. You may have some 1-0 wins too, which the team already had one, but you just need some balance between that defensive performance and the actual offense.
Yeah, it's our 4th out of 6 matches where we've scored 0 goals. So that's nothing to hang your hat on. We did have that reign of goals against the Galaxy that we kind of look back on fondly here. But let's start this match recap off like we usually do with our starting 11. Now that we're kind of back to normal here, nobody's sitting in the back of their car doing this podcast like Phil and I had been doing on the last couple episodes. Starting 11, there's plenty to talk about. You and I joked before that we could probably spend half an hour just analyzing and discussing this starting 11. You mentioned the injuries were piling up before we started recording, and that's symbolic of this starting 11. So let's say it and let's talk about it. Ben Lunt was back in goal. The center back line was Joachim Nilsson, Henry Kessler, and Josh Yarrow. They were our 3 center backs. Left wing back was Giannis Horn. Right wing back was Kyle Hebert. And then our midfield consisted of, well, I guess Alfredo Morales, Marcel Hartl, Chris Durkin, and Conrad Wallum in, I would say, a diamond formation. And then you had Simon Betcher up front. Basically a 5-4-1 with as many defenders as you could fit into a single starting 11. And then Simon Betcher was up front. I mentioned a diamond because this 5-4-1 to me, it did have clear wingbacks. You had Giannis Horn and you had Kyle Hebert on the left and the right. And then in the midfield, it was more of a vertical orientation, especially when we were on the attack or in possession, where you had Alfredo Morales as the clear pivot, the clear number 6, deeper towards the back line. And then you had on the left side, it was Marcel Hartl. On the right side, it was Conrad Wallum. And then in front of them, it was Chris Durkin, or at least alongside them, it was Chris Durkin. You could say it was like a 5-1-3-1 or a 5-4-1. However, Alfredo Morales was clearly deeper than Marcel Hartl, Chris Durkin, and Conrad Wallum, and then Simon Betcher up front. First thoughts on this lineup when you saw it, and kind of how you think it played out.
It was a surprise to me, especially because I mentioned injuries are piling up, but none of the guys who started on the back line the previous game were injured, and that had been working for the team. And I don't know, just a lot of movement, and you want to start getting Nilsson some minutes, but I don't know why change something that has been working. I don't know. I didn't like having 5 center backs and seeing Kyle Heaver as a wing back. what we have seen before. Obviously, he's a great player, but I just don't think he has the skill required for that position. So that was the first question where I was like, oh, Hiver as a wing back, you can do something different. Why not Akil Watts again there? Maybe give him another try. If he is not the guy, maybe move Wallem to
Mm-hmm.
the right wing back and maybe see what Celio can do as a left wing back, or even Mackay Joyner. Obviously, he wasn't in the lineup, but could be another option. Or if you don't want to make a lot of changes, you also have another homegrown product, Tyson Pierce, who can play as a right wing back. See what he can do there.
You also had Joey Zielinski on the bench. You had Akil Watts on the bench. And I think when it comes to Kyle Hiebert at right wing back, which is one of the more polarizing positions to analyze, it's worth saying this was option 3 of our 3 options that we posited last week on Flyover, looking at keeping the same with Akil Watts at right wing back, moving Conrad Wallem over there, like you mentioned, because he has played that right wing back spot, or Kyle Hiebert. And beyond that, then you start to get really creative of tossing in Joey Zielinski, where I don't think anybody expects or expected him to start. But you could also look at changing up the formation in general. And that one thing right there is something I think we have no data to show that Olaf is willing to do that. He's riding with the 3 center backs. He's riding with the wing backs, but he is being a little different in the midfield approach. So if you're looking to what are we going to do against SKC based on this and previous matches, don't look to go crazy in a 4-4-2 or 4-2-3-1 necessarily. You don't have any data to support that that's something Olaf wants to do with this City team. Yeah, he did it in the past, and he's run a mixture of 4 and 5 in the back in the past with other teams. But with City so far, both in preseason and the first 6 games, you're not looking at any change from the 3 center backs. So the question to me becomes, what are you doing in the midfield that then makes sense for all these other positions? You're starting to see some kind of weird depth breakdown in here. He obviously wants to keep Kyle Hiebert on the field at all costs. That seems pretty apparent to me, both in preseason and now his willingness to move him around in a wingback role to keep him on the field over Akil Watts. It doesn't really seem like that's necessarily something that's a given, is that Akil Watts is second on the depth chart behind Thomas Totland at right wingback because of this game in particular. And that didn't do anything to really impact the other midfield positions, that singular role. You could have plugged Akil Watts in right from the get-go, unless there was a fitness issue that we don't know about. But since he subbed in later in the game, that doesn't seem likely. You had Conrad Wallem move into the midfield, which I think that's not too surprising. We did see him move there earlier this season. We know he can play the midfield roles. So if you're looking at this kind of diamond midfield or a 5-4-1 flat defense as in a rest defense, Conrad Wallem makes sense anywhere. And Marcel Hartl has been on the left just as much as he's been centrally in the midfield. Last season, he played almost exclusively a left midfield role. That's not that surprising. Chris Durkin in the 10 role, fairly surprising. You got to wonder at that point, why didn't Tomas Ostrak start the game at the 10 when he's got some more comfortability there? He's played it historically. What does Olaf see in Chris Durkin in that role that he doesn't see Tomas Ostrak yet? Is it purely fitness? Because post-game, he mentioned Celio Pompeiu's fitness potentially as a reason why he hasn't started yet. I don't know. At some point, after you fully recovered, you really have to take that chance and see these guys get a longer run out. So maybe that's on the horizon. But I look at Chris Durkin, I look at Kyle Hiebert as the biggest question marks here. And I would even extend that to Jonas Horn, saying, ideally, I would really like to keep Jonas Horn as that left center back because he's so good at that position. And we've talked about Horn as the center back, Kessler as the central center back. And then on that right side, that's open for grabs, kind of. Do you run Hiebert, Baumgartel? Will Nielsen supplant Horn at the left center back, though this match offered a little bit of data that might not be the greatest call. We're going to talk about the goal in a second, and it's arguable that it's Joachim Nielsen's fault, at least initially, in how that space was created. But ultimately, Santi, I will say that one of the things that we're going to get to that I had the most frustration on in hindsight doesn't even relate to the starting 11. It's the match day roster itself. We're going to talk about it in a minute, but the tease is we only had 19 of 20 roster slots filled on our match day roster. There was an empty slot, and we only went with 8 subs into this game. So I'm going to leave it at that right now, because in the second half, I'm going to probably rage a little bit on that. Instead, let's just look at a few of the things as the game progressed before we get into our thoughts. And in the first half, I would say St. Louis was on the attack a little bit more than they had been to open the game. There were 2 shots by Conrad Wallem early. There was some pretty good possession, pretty good entrances into the final third, though nothing overly dangerous. And then there was kind of a gap. I even tweeted it out that there was kind of an initial push and then a gap in the first half. And during that gap is when Austin scored their goal. They had gotten the ball deep into the St. Louis zone, had the ball on the end line near where Joachim Nilsson was on St. Louis's left side. And Mirto Uzuni scored the shot from the center, assisted by Usman Bakari after Bakari beat Joachim Nilsson 1v1. It was very tight space, but he worked the ball around inside past Nilsson enough to generate a pass opportunity into Uzuni, who is right basically in front of goal on the Josh Yarrow center back side, that right side. And unfortunately, I do think it pinged off of Yarrow a little bit.
Yeah.
Deflected. So when you're talking about Ben Lunt on this one, I can't really fault Ben Lunt because he was in position where the ball was going to go. It was Josh Yarrow that kind of deflected it. And you can't blame Josh Yarrow for deflecting a ball like that either. It's just one of those unfortunate things. Goes off Yarrow. But if you're going to look to any kind of fault on the shot, I disliked how deep our back line was. Nobody was engaging Uzuni in the central there. It was underneath Morales. It was in front of the center backs. And there was just too much space that they left open in the middle of the box.
Yeah, and then Nilsson had to move there and try to win the 1v1. He had previously, earlier in the game, he had one against also Bukhari, and Bukhari ended up shooting the ball, but he didn't have really good space, and it touched the outside net. But on this one, he had a couple of good moves and was able to beat Nilsson. But yeah, the lack of other players in the area, more like Bukhari starting between basically the back line and Morales, basically left him with just a 1v1 situation. And unfortunately, this time Nilsson wasn't able to cover the space. And Austin, basically that was one of 2 shots on goal for Austin. Basically, they did enough to create opportunities, to score one of those chances, and took the game away.
They definitely did enough, and they had very few shots overall, but in the first half, they had just about all their shots. By the time that they scored that goal, that was their third to last shot opportunity of the entire game. So that kind of shows you, as this game progressed in the first half, you had St. Louis with a decent volley, a decent push at the beginning of the game. Austin had their handful of shots in the middle of the half, and then borderline bunkered from then on, definitely in the second half, but at least in the first half, they didn't generate much just alongside City in the back half of the first half. And when you get it at the end of the first half, possession wise, St. Louis had 54%. The shots on target, neither team was impressive. This was a battle of 2 teams that were counterattack based. They didn't really want possession. Neither team tried to possess. Neither team effectively possessed. And you look at St. Louis ending the first half with 3 shots, none on target, and Austin finishing it with 7 shots, 2 on target. You have an expected goals from St. Louis in the first half of just 0.12. You have an expected goals of Austin in the first half of 0.65. Nothing to write home about, especially aside from that one shot by Uzuni, which was a 0.2 XG itself. That was most of Austin's chance on that one single shot. Accurate passes, both teams had about the same percentage of accurate passes, but St. Louis had about 30 more accurate passes than Austin. Didn't amount to anything, though. So you end the first half highly underwhelmed. You're thinking Austin has beaten St. Louis deep in their own zone when St. Louis had run out so many defenders. Frustrating on the execution more than anything, because you think of this St. Louis City team as, if you're going to do one thing well, it's defend. And for you to be beaten so, I would say, easily in that sense, where it was quick. It was a quick strike that happened from possession where Bukhari singularly opened up enough space. And this is one thing that I mentioned post game, and I'll get into more of my thoughts on this. But Bukhari did exactly what I want St. Louis to be able to do when they're facing a low block. They're facing a ton of defenders in the box. You have to have that one player that can just beat another 1v1 and then make a smart pass, make a good pass off of that. I would argue that Salio in the second half did something similar, but never connected the ball to it with a good pass afterwards. There's a screenshot that's floating around on Instagram, I know, a video of Celio doing the work 1v1 on the left side of goal as the supporters are looking at the field. It's on the right side. He does this 1v1 work where he gets around on the end line, but his cross in is immediately deflected away. Yeah, quality work to get around, but what we need from St. Louis is what Bakari was able to do. Beat the defender 1v1 near the end line or in the wing or the channel area, and then find somebody. Be intentional with where you're sending the ball, because it's that last pass that we're missing and what Austin was able to beat us on. So we go into halftime, we're down 1-0, no changes are made. And then things start to get a little wacky there in the middle of the second half. 61 minute, we have a sub that was also related to an injury. We don't know the extent of the injury, but Olaf did say post-game that all of Chris Durkin, Alfredo Morales, and Giannis Horn all sustained injuries of some kind. So 61 minutes into the second half, Celio and Akil Watts entered for Chris Durkin and Joachim Nilsson. Santi, what are your thoughts on what you saw from Celio when he entered the game and kind of what this did? Because it changed up a few things. We went from, we ended up with a set formation, Celio coming in, talking to Conrad Wallem, clearly having instructions when he came on in the match, moving Giannis Horn back to left center back, moving Wallem to left wing back. Celio took the left midfield role in that diamond, and Akil Watts took Wallem's right mid role. What do you think this did for St. Louis, and did it give them enough energy? Because it wasn't that long before the weather delay, but did you see enough from what they did here that kind of got you excited?
Well, I was excited to see Celio getting significant minutes, and I think between when he entered and the weather delay, not a lot happened. It was more after the weather delay when also Thomas Ostra came in. Both of them look really good, and yeah, you mentioned Celio did some good work on the 1v1, but didn't have the final pass. Had one chance where he also won a 1v1 and was ready. His shot was blocked. But I think he did a good job, and he showed what he can do, especially on those 1v1 situations. And the offense really changed when both him and Thomas Ostrak were in the game. Which just thinking about the next game and thinking about the amount of injuries, not knowing if the three guys that got injured will be out for that game, I would love to see Celio and Ostra getting more minutes. And yeah, Olaf mentioned some issue with fitness, but maybe this was the first step on getting them to that point where they can play at least 45 minutes, 60 minutes. But I would like to see more. The offense really changed with Celio. He had some good connections with Wallem on the next side, on the left side. Also connected well with Hartel, but it was a different team after those two substitutions, Celio and Ostra coming in.
And Olaf Melberg commented post-game about the quality that Conrad Wallem and Celio Pompeu had in their interplay, the way that they played off each other, Celio, and you could see it where one would move out to the wing, one would cut in, and they would have some good progression on that left side. The weather delay kind of put a damper on everything. Olaf even said post-game that he liked what they were doing just before that, and it took a little bit of the winds out of their sails. Right before the weather delay, we saw that Klaus and Ostrak were preparing to come on, but also that was when Austin made a sub, Ilie Sanchez in for Osman Bukhari. This, to me, was a furtherance of their parking the bus. They took out one of their attacking players. They subbed him in for a holding midfielder in Ilie Sanchez. And this is where, coming out of the weather delay, you make the change, Klaus and Ostrak for Betcher and Morales. Morales apparently picked up an injury as well. We'll hope to have more information on that this week. But that change in particular continued the spark. Like you said, Ostrak changed the way the midfield was operating with the ball. Klaus didn't have a massive impact outside of his positioning, I would say, but loved what Ostrak was offering. And then as that half progressed, it was more Austin bunkering down. So you look at the second half as far as the stats go, and you see St. Louis having 13 shots, only 2 on target, but Austin having 1 shot total that came at 59 minutes from Owen Wolf. That was their only shot opportunity. 59 minutes was almost 10 minutes before the weather delay. So you're talking that entire sequence after the weather delay where St. Louis fans in the aftermath of this game are loving what you saw from the attack in comparison to previous games. You're loving what Salio did. You love what Ostrak did in the midfield. You like the chances that were happening with Wallum and Salio and Hartle, and you're wanting to see more of that. There's a quote that I think is in, and I don't mean to get ahead of us in our notes here, Santi, but there's a quote that's in an article from Matt Doyle where he references, and I just want to get this out of the way, he references the final 25 minutes of a match being the tactics-free zone. And I think that's an important thing to get at, because as you get into the back half of this game, you saw some wild things happen on the St. Louis side, but you also saw an Austin team that, like I alluded to earlier, completely bunkered down. They didn't have any semblance, any desire to not only possess the ball, but also to really attack. They were just defending. They were happy with 1-goal lead. They were happy to keep that. And they were confident in themselves that they could keep that by taking all of the space in the world away from the penalty box and saying, St. Louis is going to have to figure out a way to draw us out. They're going to have to figure out a way to get us out of our mindset of this low block. And St. Louis wasn't able to do that. St. Louis had tons of possession. In the second half, we had 77% possession overall. I mentioned the 13 shots, but only 2 on target. We had 267 passes to Austin's 73 in the second half. We had the ball. We could do anything we want if we had the talent and the capabilities to do it. But unfortunately, we couldn't dictate much of anything. We had a ton of crosses in the box. We had a ton of passes in the final third. And we also had another center back enter the fray, as at 85 minutes, Timo Baumgartel entered for Giannis Horn. And this was a combination of things to me. To be fair, I do think that this was out of necessity only. Don't think the plan was to bring Baumgartel in for Horn, because Horn was injured. This was the most obvious injury of the entire game of all three of those players, where you could see it looked like a groin injury potentially to me, the way that he just couldn't keep going after winning a tackle in deep in our own zone. Olaf said post-game he hopes it was just a cramp, so hopefully we have good news later on this week on that. But the insertion of Timo Baumgartel into the lineup and into that 11 completely dumbfounded every single person in attendance at Energizer Park, and it dumbfounded everybody who was watching the game. I don't think you had a single fan who is, if you were being honest with yourself, could say, oh yeah, that makes sense to toss Timo Baumgartel up next to Klaus in a 2-striker formation. Olaf said post-game on Timo at center forward, quote, "We wanted to bring more physique in the box. I didn't think we managed to put enough balls in the box to get the most out of him and Klaus there. But yeah, that was the purpose, to get more physique and another player for the crosses and the longer ball." So it was like I said initially during the game, it was a big body. It was the only option they had based on the game day roster that they could throw up there. And you're in desperation mode because it's 85 minutes. You're down a goal at home. At least you want to salvage a point at home. Fans would still be disappointed. You'd still be disappointed, but you'd salvage a point. And so you threw the kitchen sink, essentially. What you had available, you threw. Here's where the problem that I have that I mentioned at the very beginning of the show with the match day roster. You threw the kitchen sink out there, but you weren't playing with all of your tools. You didn't have that last person on your roster. You could have filled it with a Mekhi Joyner or a Caden Glover. And it was noteworthy. Those two didn't even start the City 2 game. And you're going to prioritize City versus City 2 every day of the week. So it made absolutely no sense, knowing that Cedric Toyshirt was out and you were thin at striker, that you wouldn't at least fill this with a body, because this is the opportunity. This is that moment in the game where things are happening that you don't game plan for. You have injuries occur. You're down by a goal. You need to find attackers to put in position to receive those crosses, to put yourself in a position you're comfortable with to receive those crosses, which I've got the cross stat here in a minute, and it's egregious in how many crosses we attempted versus how many we were successful on. And part of that is having players who can put themselves in positions that they are comfortable in and that they know, and they're used to navigating those areas. Timo Baumgartel is not that player. He's a big body, yeah, and it might work on set pieces like we do with Henry Kessler, putting him near goal, but that should not be an option. You shouldn't have to be forced into that corner in the run of play, even at 85 minutes. You should have another option left to pull out of, and to have that person not be on your roster and just leave an open spot, I just can't forgive that.
Yeah, just leaving that roster spot open. I think that the coaching staff failed there. Obviously, we don't have all the information. Maybe they were counting on Toyshart being available and found out too late, although Um, I don't know. I think you could have still done something, especially considering that both of them, Glover and Joyner, didn't start for City too.
Yeah.
But yeah, 46 crosses by City yesterday, and I found a stat: only 3 of those crosses had a successful completion into the penalty area. So that tells of all those, and then you go back and think, okay. 6 of those were from Kyle Heaver. And as I think about how the game developed and Austin bunkered down and basically told City, here's the ball, figure out a way to beat me. They left a lot of space on the right side, probably
Mm-hmm.
counting on Kyle Heaver
Yeah.
making a cross. And yeah, like you can cross it all day, but if you don't have the skill set to get a good cross, and I think Austin figured that out. I said, well, let's leave a space there, and maybe he will get a goal and they will score. But maybe they won't, and they were counting on just those crosses not going anywhere, and they were also defending well. They were clearing
Yes.
the crosses, and they know they have a good defense. They have improved a lot compared to previous season. Going into the game, City was first and Austin was second on goals allowed in the Western Conference. So it
Mm-hmm.
was also good defense, good two good
Yeah.
defenses going against each other. So Austin knew that they could defend the result, and most of the second half they just sat low and just were counting on themselves being able to withstand all the attacks from City, and they did well at that. But yeah, the not having Joyner or Glover obviously is a big question mark going into a game with just 2 strikers or forwards, whatever you want to call it. I think was a mistake, and that's where you have to go to your young kids, and maybe they will get an opportunity to get some minutes, and that's where they start developing as professional players in the top division. Like they start getting some minutes, and maybe situations like that they will learn from, or even like get a goal, get an assist. You never know, but you have to give the kids a chance. If your depth is depleted, you have to start pulling from there.
And this is why MLS teams have supplemental rosters. This is why we have homegrown players. Not saying you should even be pulling up because Joyner and Pierce are on those off roster homegrowns. Brendan
Mhm.
McSorley isn't signed to City. He's City too. So for those guys, you'd have to have short-term loans. In particular, Caden Glover, there's no reason you couldn't just add him to the game day roster as an emergency type person. And this was essentially an emergency type situation. In the second half, one thing I want to go back to is and because we're seeing some comments in the chat about Salio and Klaus and Ostrak, especially making those changes in the second half. I do tend to agree with Jeremy Clements in the chat. And I think that it wasn't just the way that those players had excellent opportunities. They had excellent 1v1s. They performed well. It was also the context of the match that they were entered into. Down 1-0, Austin had already bunkered, and you were given space to work with. Like, you had so much freedom to progress the ball into the final third. The problem with all of these players is you still didn't have that quality to either deliver the final pass into a good area to create the shot, or you didn't have a player who was capable of making that final shot that could actually score a goal. I think the closest and, in my opinion, the best shot opportunity we had was around, I want to say 57 minutes, maybe 53. And it was Simon Betcher before he left the game. He received the ball, held it up a little bit, and then dropped it off to Marcel Hartl, who had this nice cross that was saved on a shot outside the box. It was a difficult shot, but Hartl had that quality where he could have finished it. And that's the kind of opportunity that we just couldn't create, even when Salio, Klaus, and Ostrak were on the field. We weren't getting those quality moments. So I love what Salio was doing, but I tend to not oversell the necessity to get him into the starting 11 based on that performance. I do think it's warranted that you have to give him a longer lookout. But what I'm saying is just temper your expectations, or even temper overall what you saw, because while he did do a good job creating, ideally he would have had somebody to deliver to, because Salio was doing a lot of his work on the wings and in the left channel. And all of those 1v1 moves that he was making, all of beating players on the dribble, which he's so good at, would be so much better if somebody would be able to receive service from him. If he'd send a cross in and it would get to somebody who's freed up, or somebody, if he can create space by drawing in those 1v2s and then opening up the field to pass the ball off to, like, that's where your moneymaker is for really getting the most out of Celio Pompeu. It's not letting him go 1v1 and then hoping he can shoot and score a worldie. And on the other side of the field, Kyle Hebert almost embodies that crossing issue. The stats on this were interesting because, like what you were saying, the 46 or so cross attempts that we had and 6 or 7 that actually landed, of those crosses, Marcel Hartl had 15 attempts. Conrad Wallem, Celio Pompeu, and Kyle Hebert all had 6 attempted crosses. When you talk about accurate crosses, Kyle Hebert with 3, Marcel Hartl with 2, Celio and Wallem with 1 each. It's abysmal. It was 16% of our crosses actually landed to somebody. If you're going to leverage 40 plus crosses to try and generate a goal, and you are successful at 16% of them, that's a problem. And is it a problem on the side of it where you're delivering the cross, not getting it into good positions? Because I feel like Kyle Hebert caught a lot of flack for some of those. Or is it a position where you don't have the personnel, you don't have the forwards getting in position to receive the ball? Like, it comes on both sides of that have to be considered in this equation. It's not just the players who are delivering the crosses that they might not be quality crosses, but it's also the players receiving it. And part of that is on the player. Part of it is on the coach for putting the personnel out there who know what they're doing in those positions. Again, I don't put a single bit of blame on Timo Baumgartel for having 3 potential opportunities with the ball landing near him to not finish. It's not his job to finish the ball in that position. Yeah, he's put in there and he's asked to do it, and he's a professional soccer player, so he's going to try. You could see the moments of frustration where he just didn't have that first initial instinct. And how many times have we said it's all about that first instinct, that first touch? How many times have we gotten on Klaus for not being able to convert on that first touch when he might need to pull a ball back or have an extra dribble? And if he would have just shot first, he would have probably scored. Timo Baumgartel is that times 1,000 because that's not his position. So there's a lot of problems I have that kind of add up when it comes to these crosses, who's finishing, the number of players that you're putting in the box to finish in this scenario. Some of it might go back to the formation, but at the end of the day, I think it's the players who need to be a little more quality in certain aspects of the game as well, in knowing what they need to do against a bunker defense. Because it all goes back to that to me. It's what Austin was showing. St. Louis needed to find a way to beat, to draw out, to create something because they had the ball so much and they couldn't figure it out.
Yeah, it was just if you think about the game when City played Seattle, it was similar. City score and then they defended the result. Like that's what Austin was doing, and they were successful. They're gonna have some of those. The team needs to be more consistent on offense. He did a great job on those last 25 minutes, and part of it was what Austin offered, but just more consistency. You can't go like a whole half and not make adjustments for the second half. This time the substitutions may have come a little bit earlier, but still you need to adjust for the second half if you need to. It's just another 1-0 defeat, and obviously people are starting to freak out and just concerned about the results and about the lack of offense. But my take is that it's early on the season and you still have time to make adjustments and figure things out.
There have been calls already, as early as it is 6 matches in, for Olaf Melberg to be out. just to get it on the record, it is way too early for that conversation. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we're absolutely on the same page on that front. It is way too early. Now, part of that is you've got the stellar defense that's been occurring. This was the first match that you really saw a breakdown in that. Austin had another goal that was called offside, but this was kind of the first match where you can really say, well, first of all, it's the first match where St. Louis conceded in the run of play, but it's also the first goal that I think you really point to the back line and the defense as having messed up, kind of.
Mhm.
They had a lapse. Then you could point to exactly like we did earlier, the players and the positioning that caused the lapse, and also some bad luck with Yaro's deflection that you can't really defend anything like that. Uh, but you shouldn't have allowed that shot to occur in the first place. Now, Olaf postgame was grilled pretty hard on a bunch of things. Now, he had some answers, some non-answers. One thing I thought was interesting was a question about, is there enough in attack in this team? And
Yeah.
he was kind of miffed at that question. It
Mhm.
seemed kind of needing a little clarification in our team, asking about the attack. And Olaf goes on to say, I mean, I thought today as a team, we created enough chances. We had a lot of entries into the final third. I thought our positioning was really good. Our game plan was good. Things were working really well. We just lacked the quality in the final third. I think you could see that the amount of entries we have, the half chances and chances. We hope to score at least a goal, obviously. And this speaks to the way I've been interpreting and the way I saw on the replay what happened in the final third. And some of the stats do support this notion where St. Louis had 129 passes in the final third. That's not passes into. They had 45 passes into the final third, but they progressed the ball via carry and passing into the final third. 129 passes within the final third of the field to Austin's 56. So if you have 129 passes, you're spending a lot of time in the final third. And it was a product of the game state later on in the game, especially in the second half. But it was also a product of what you were able to do in the first half, just getting the ball into the final third. When you have that many passes and you're kind of living in the final third for so much of the game, and you look at the heat maps, and it's basically this huge yellow and red dot in Austin's penalty area for their heat map, you know what you're facing. You know what you're able to do and where you're able to get on the field into the final third. That problem is quality. It's the players on the field not able to pull Austin out of position, not able to create for themselves. So I don't even think at that point you can say, all right, we would have done better with a 4-4-2. We would have done better with a
Mm.
4-2-3-1. Because at that point, when you're in the final third, how many times have we heard from a Carnell team, a Hackworth team, and a Melberg team that it's more fluid when you get into the final third? Positioning kind of goes out the window to an extent, and you're working the ball around. You're doing what you need to as a player to get open, to create, and to try to score a goal however you need to. You're not going to, center backs will stay back, but ultimately your attackers are moving a lot more fluidly. So the formation of it all kind of breaks down. You have the width, you have the attackers in Hartl, Durkin at times, Ostrak, Betcher, Klaus, whoever, but they weren't able to produce. They weren't able to take getting the ball into the final third and converting it into an actual goal. They weren't even really able to come close for the most part. And that's why one of the big reasons I struggle to say that based on how this game went, with how much we lived in the final third, and how much Austin was able to just say, all right, you figure out a way to beat us. We couldn't do it. Like, Olaf can only do so much, and you could have issues with the formation. I do have issues with his matchday roster selection and who he put in there. But ultimately, that was after 85 minutes. You're playing 85 minutes of soccer before my biggest concern popped up in what happened with Timo Baumgartel. And you're possessing the ball so much, you're chasing the game, you're at home, and the players weren't able to break down this Austin team. That's concerning to me. And I guess the only silver lining I have with that is we were operating without Cedric Toyshirt. We were operating without Edu Leuven. And those two players can be difference makers in some of those areas that we were really embarrassing at this weekend.
Yeah, and you can point to the guys that weren't there, but injuries are part of it, and you will always have a guy or two that may be out, or maybe more guys. If you think Rasmus Alm is still out, and some more guys are recovering from injuries.
Yeah.
But that's when your depth needs to shine and deliver. But the way I saw it yesterday, you are also not giving the best opportunities to those next guys in the lineup to have significant minutes and come in when they need to and make a difference. And maybe Celio and Ostrak, this is the beginning of them starting getting more minutes. Maybe they will see more cameos as long subs, and what I mean is like 30-35 minutes at least, and then if needed, go to the starting lineup depending on how they continue progressing, but definitely questionable yesterday on the management of the roster and the lineup. Obviously, it's easy to make the analysis after the game, but just that substitution on the 85th minute for Timo Baumgartner just brought me back to I was telling Hector on the broadcast, just reminded me of the St. Louis FC days. There was one game that Sam Fink, I think he came as a sub or he was sent up there.
Yeah.
And I don't remember who was on the bench, but I remember asking Anthony Pulis about it. He was like, "Well, I didn't have other center forwards," and he was kind of mad about it. So it made me think a lot about that. I was like, oh, I wonder if somebody's gonna ask Olaf about it.
I would love to hear, and if we can hear from him this week on that thought process, that would be great. But we'll have to wait and see on that front. When it comes to Salio and Ostrak, one of the things that I'm curious about is Olaf has shown himself to be pretty data driven. He's made a few alliterations to following the data and the trends and managing a game and subsequent games based on that. Looking at the goals added ratings, which is that stat that we use that targets every touch, every 2 touches on the ball as it leads to, does it move the ball up? Does it move the ball back? Does it further your attempts to score a goal or prevent concessions? And it measures shooting, passing, receptions, fouls, challenges, all of those different things besides just the eye test of, are you shooting the ball well or have you made a good pass? You know who got the worst goals added rating of anyone on our team this weekend? It was Chris Durkin. And I there's 2 schools of thought on that. First of all, he was playing out of position. Chris Durkin, you could say he's a 10, but you can also say he's existed as a 6 and a potential box to box, but also has played center back. So you're playing him out of position as the 10. You also look at some of the other people. Kyle Hebert, Joachim Nilsson had the other 2 lowest. Ostrak and Pompey were right in the middle there with their time. But in particular with Chris Durkin, this makes me wonder, with the way that Olaf has been employing his lineups, using this 3-4-1-2 with Edu Leuven primarily as that stay-at-home defensive midfielder. Does this open up an opportunity for Tomas Ostrak in particular, especially with the potential injury to Alfredo Morales, to see a potential spot start alongside Edu Leuven if he returns, but maybe in place of Edu Leuven, and you give that Chris Durkin stay-at-home defensive midfielder role an opportunity next game? I think that there is a more clear path right now for me for Tomas Ostrak. As much as I think everybody's going to hate me saying this, I think there's a clearer path right now for Tomas Ostrak to see time versus Celio Pompeu to see a start next game. I still wonder how much stock Olaf is going to put into how we looked in the last 25 minutes with Celio on the field, given what the game state was and given what SKC will offer next week. I wonder about those things as opposed to just the availability factor, more or less, or the personnel factor in central midfield, where you could make an argument that you could take out 1 or 2 attackers and plug Celio in. But remember, Celio is an attacker in this system. He is not a wingback, as we've seen so far from Olaf. I will go back to this point that I made earlier, that I'm willing to entertain ideas based on facts that I see from Olaf. And Olaf has not shown a willingness to put Celio in at wingback. Until he does that, I'm going to discount him as a wingback and say he's an attacker. He is in the same depth chart as Klaus, Betcher, and Toyshirt. And so if you get a healthy Toyshirt back, that's a person in the way of Celio. A lot of people, well, I would say 50-50 probably at this point, of wanting to see Klaus start versus wanting to see Klaus traded. And then you have Simon Betcher. So I don't know. The question is more so, it's not has Celio earned a chance. It's, have we seen so little of our attack? And this may be a yes for a lot of fans. Have we seen so little from our attack that we are willing to completely pivot away from who has shown, I guess, more favor into what Olaf wants to do? And we're saying these guys have done nothing so far. So yeah, let's throw them in there. Throw in Pompeu, throw in Ostrak, get Akil Watts at right back while we have Thomas Totland out. Put in, throw in Timo Baumgartel at center back, get Joachim Nilsson out. Are we taking these sample sizes through 5 or 6 games and saying we have not seen near enough, and now we're ready to pivot to something that we've seen glimpses of for 20, 25 minutes, despite the fact that the game state was not what you would see at the start of a game?
It's still a small sample size, not only for the 25 minutes yesterday, but yeah, 6 games and the way the games have gone. But yeah, and I will be cautious about inserting Celio in the starting 11, but have him available as that first sub you will make.
Mm-hmm.
60th minute, 65th minute, see what happens in a couple of games, and that's how he gained a starting role last season. Like
It's true.
he took advantage of the opportunities and show what he was able to do. So give him that chance. It's a guy coming back from injury. Yesterday was a good start. Yeah, maybe the circumstances of the game dictated that, but just give him more minutes and see what he can deliver, and see if he could be another option for an attack that so far hasn't been great.
And on Celio Pompeu, just for what Olaf said post game, Olaf said, "I thought he did well. He's had a good couple of weeks in training, which is not we've seen. He's been scoring worldies at training. Matthew Rocchio from Sports Hub STL will sing his praises for days." And Olaf goes on to say, obviously he was out for a long, long time, so he's still building on everything fitness wise, especially. But I thought he did well, and he's a player that is good technically and good 1v1. I thought he gave us that together with Conrad. Good combinations on the left-hand side, Celio joining in there as well. Yeah, I thought we had some good combinations on the left-hand side after he came on. So if you're Olaf and you're looking to keep Conrad Wallem in the game and you liked what you saw enough, I think that's probably your path in, is liking what you saw on that left side and then saying, we just want to give this a go no matter what the game state is. We saw what we did when we ran out 5 or 6 defenders in this game. And that is clearly, and Olaf was rightly taken to task, I think, post game on a lot of that. A lot of the questions focused on the massive number of defenders. And again, I'm not saying you blow up that system and you completely go into a four-man back line, or you make too big of a course correction, but there has to be a happy medium here of saying, you can have Conrad Wallem on the left wing side. You can have Akil Watts maybe on the right wing side. And then if you have those two, you've got your center backs lined up between Horn or Hebert or Kessler or Nilsson or Baumgartel. Keep those 3 at your center backs. You've got some wing backs. You've got depth. Use Akil Watts there to start off with. If you need to pivot later on, you've got options. But then your central midfield, depending on your health, any of Leuven, Ostrak, Durkin, or Morales, I personally, at this point, why not go with a Leuven and Ostrak if both are healthy? And then you can change things a little bit up front if you feel confident, because this back line has been productive. Akil Watts in his short time at right wing back, that's the thing that you really want to focus on if you're Olaf, is the consistency of not changing too much on the back line and in your defensive midfield area to feel like you're sacrificing defense for the attack. Because it really seems like that's where we are. It's Olaf not wanting to sacrifice too much of the defensive structure he's built to go all in on an attack. And I don't know what all in on an attack looks like as far as sacrificing a midfielder or sacrificing wing backs in their support. There are things in the game that relates to more than just a defender or a midfielder or an attacker as far as the labels go. But game planning wise, I think you can use a player like Celio to open things up that may help against SKC. And if you like what you saw enough from Celio and Wallem, build on it. Like I've spent a lot of time in this show saying, let's take it back a notch in what we're reading into these last 20 or 25, because I don't think that directly translates into what could happen for 60 or 65. But at this point, 4 out of 6 games without a goal, maybe you do need to go that far. Maybe you do need to right the ship in that form. I guess I'm more positing questions and getting thought-provoking things as opposed to just taking a hard stance, because, I don't necessarily want to say you can read everything into that last 20 minutes, and you should read everything in the last 20 minutes, but it could still give you something to build off of if you're so dissatisfied with everything else going on.
Yeah, and maybe back-to-back losses will also shake things up a little bit, especially if you look at the schedule, what's coming. You have that classic against Sporting KC, and then you have a Columbus team at home that it's also a difficult team. So yeah, definitely early in the season, but you cannot be in the same position you were last season, where you
Yeah.
get into the second half and you need a lot of points and need almost a miracle to get into the postseason. So slowly, I think um, Olaf needs to start looking at things. And yeah, the defensive performance is still great, but you need a balance. You need a balance between both, and just these back-to-back losses could be a good opportunity to start looking at things, giving a look to other players. The one thing that also caught my attention was Klaus not starting again, and
Hmm.
when you guys had the show on Thursday, you had both him and Betcher on the starting 11.
Yeah.
Well, not the show, but our consensus starting 11.
Yeah. And I don't know what to make of that, to be quite honest. Like I I see value in what Klaus can bring in that holding striker. He's good with the ball at his feet, which is exactly what you want if you need better quality touches in the final third. You need to be better with the ball at your feet. He's good to play it off to others, whether it's a heel flick or otherwise. So I don't know what he has to do to get a spot back in this lineup. I'm not. I'm miffed. I'm as miffed as anybody on two straight non-starts from Klaus and what it's going to take to get him back in the lineup, given the anemic attack that we've seen so far. He didn't offer a whole lot when he subbed in. I think Salio stole the show in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
But that's not to say that both Salio and Klaus can't be an option, especially if Toyshirt is injured, and that gives you Betcher off the bench. That to me is much more exciting than anything we saw yesterday, at least conceptually, because you could have them playing off of Wallem on the left wing back side. And you just need to get a better attacker or someone with better service in on the right wing back side. Last thing I'll say on the right wing back side is that's another reason I think Akil Watts is better suited there than Kyle Hebert. Hebert had so many opportunities to deliver service, and I mentioned the issues were on both sides of the ball in those receiving as well as, but ultimately Akil Watts is better at crosses. He's better at set pieces than Kyle Hebert. Let him play out there. Let him be more involved in the attack on that side. Uh, and let him see what he can do. Let him offer what he can in supporting the attack on that right wing side. You can do that to improve your attack while still not sacrificing for your defense. Those are the kind of examples that I think of when I think, how can we take the personnel that we have and be more attacking minded? Because it's all about quality on the ball. And I think Akil Watts offers that more on the right wing back side than Kyle Hebert. You've got plenty of potential quality elsewhere. You just need to see more out of them. And part of that I think may come into a training perspective. Train on being outnumbered and how to get around players. Train on without playing Monday morning quarterback too much, because I don't really want to call out what I think training should look like. It's not my role. But at the same time, these players need to be more comfortable in those positions. They need to be more comfortable in beating 1v1s and opening up space for others. Because if you're getting into the final third so much, you're not able to have this space created. You have to be able to do it somehow.
Yeah, we saw that yesterday. There was a question about in the press conference. City had the ball in Austin's box 30 times, but only 2 shots on goal.
Yeah.
So obviously that's a concern. And yeah, Austin was bunkered down, but good teams figure out a way to open a space and create enough shooting opportunities. So yeah, something to work on. Just looking here at the chat, and I was thinking about this earlier. Hopefully, Jay Reed is closer to coming back. Probably still a few more weeks, but he could be an option in the lineup too, especially when you have if Totland is still out, maybe they will come back at the same time. But Jay Reed last year he did great,
He did.
and it's too bad that he got injured before the season and couldn't continue what he was doing. But down the road, in a few weeks, he could be an option.
Jay Reed had foot surgery on January 3rd and was expected to take 3 months to recover before rehabbing, I believe was the statement. So look for him April to May. And I wonder if that's going to coincide with Totland returning, but that is unfortunate that we don't have him. It could have provided more stability and quality on that left wing back side. unfortunately. So we hope to get Reed back soon. We hope Totland gets back soon. It's clear how much we rely on our wingbacks now. I think if anything is clear after this game as well, we rely on them so much, and
Mm-hmm.
the injuries with lack of depth has created this kind of problem. And Olaf confronted that head on. He was pretty clear that we don't have a clear next man up at right wing back for Thomas Totland. There's Wallem can slide over, Akil can move into that spot, but he doesn't view anybody as like a Totland replacement, like for like, as far as quality goes. And that seems to be pretty obvious in what we saw. Santi, Marcel Hartl has the sixth most key passes in MLS. He had 4 key passes in this game. It's one of the only stats to write home about as far as offensive production. Conrad Wallem did pretty well. Marcel Hartl had a 0.25 XG. Conrad Wallem had a 0.24, including those 2 shots early on in the game. Beyond that, I just want to call those out because if you're going to, you might as well have some kind of offensive production if you're not going to score any goals. And Wallem and Hartl were basically it for City as far as goal scoring presences. Any other comments from this game before we do a brief look forward and then touch on our favorite games from around the league?
No, I think that's enough about this game. A lot of frustration. Hopefully, we'll be able to get away from that next week when the team visits Sporting KC.
That's right. Now, next week is the first of 2 rivalry matches this year. St. Louis looks to right the ship next Saturday at Children's Mercy or Energizer Park West against SKC. This SKC team this has been a big week for them. Fresh off a 2-1 loss to FC Dallas, they sit with just 1 point in 6 games, last in the West. And oh yeah, in case you hadn't heard the news on Monday, Peter Vermes, the longtime head coach and basically guy that ran their entire sporting department for years and years, has been fired. Peter Vermes has been fired on Monday, March 31st, as reported by Tom Bogert, after signing a new contract in 2023 through the 2028 season. So if that tells you, along with what happened to Bradley Carnell and Jim Curtin and others, just how little value exists in a managerial contract in MLS, there you go. Taking over for Peter Vermes is Kerry Zavanyan, he's SKC's new interim coach right now, but he's been with Sporting as an assistant since 2009 and was an SKC midfielder from 2000 to 2008. So if you're talking about replacing Peter Vermes with somebody who can inject new life into SKC, this might not be the option that you were looking for. I don't know. We'll get into this more on Thursday's show when we preview SKC, but this is the big news that's going to permeate the entire discussion going into next week is Peter Vermes is out. I wonder how much this is going to impact what Olaf Melberg does, if anything. I'd be shocked to see too much of a change in what SKC does, but like I said, we'll preview that later this week.
Yeah, and it's obviously it will be the first game, so hopefully not that new coach bump. Hopefully that won't come. But yeah, more about that on Thursday.
Lastly, Santi, let's give a quick look at what we saw around the league this week. It was an interesting week in MLS. San Diego defeated LAFC 3-2. That was probably my match of the week outside of ours. Miami defeated Philadelphia 2-1. Seattle drew 1-1 with San Jose. Any matches really stood out to you? I know there's a couple Western Conference matchups there, including the Sunday Night Soccer match. What stood out to you?
The one I was keeping an eye on was the Sporting KC match, just because City plays them next. Defensively, they look really bad. If you look at the goals that Dallas score, you can see space and clear mistakes. So hopefully City can take advantage of that. They look very comfortable when they were up 1-0, but then in a span of 5 minutes, FC Dallas was able to revert the result, and that was it.
Everything changed. So we exit match day 6 with all teams in the Western Conference, all teams in MLS having played 6 matches. St. Louis sits 9th with 8 points. In order in the Western Conference right now, Vancouver, Austin, San Diego, Minnesota, Colorado, Portland, Dallas, LAFC, and St. Louis, with the below the playoff line looking like San Jose, Real Salt Lake, Seattle Sounders, LA Galaxy, Houston Dynamo, and in the bottom cellar is Sporting KC. Like we said, 1 point out of 6 games. SKC has a -6 goal differential. St. Louis still a respectable +2 goal differential, despite everything that we've talked about, all the problems that we've discussed. take a step back, big picture. We have scored 4. We've allowed 2, +2 goal differential, 1-1-1, both at home and away as we go west to Kansas City next weekend. Santi, any last words before we get out of here?
The only thing you were mentioning goal differential, and that's kind of deceiving. Like Sporting KC has scored 6 goals, 2 more goals than City, and only 1 point to show for.
That's a fair comparison. Massively different in goals scored, goals against, and things that impact the goal differential. We'll preview it all on Thursday for Flyover Footy as we look ahead to next week's rivalry matchup between St. Louis and Kansas City. For now, I'm Matt Baker. For Santiago Beltran, thanks for joining us on this fallout look at the 1-0 loss to Austin FC by St. Louis City. We'll be back with you later this week. Thanks for joining us, and have a good week.
Vamos, City!
All right, Santi, thanks everybody for joining us on the live stream. Appreciate it. I hope to have better news this week on some of those injuries, and yeah, we'll see what Olaf can pull out for next week in KC.